Imagine leading an entire town for 37 years without ever seeing a single face, a single sunrise, or the eyes of those who trusted you. That was Mayor Amos Kett's life in the frontier town of Bellwick. Born blind, but somehow he led with a wisdom nobody could explain. Then a mountain woman named Ressa Vale walked into his office with an old leather satchel. She asked for 10 minutes alone with him. What she pulled out wasn't medicine or prayer. It was something else. In those 10 minutes, Amos saw light for the first time in his entire life. But the U.S. Marshal standing guard looked terrified. What was in that satchel? And what price did Amos pay for his sight? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The town of Bellwick rested in a valley where the morning mist clung to the ground like old memories refusing to fade. Established in 1847 by settlers who sought peace more than prosperity, it had grown slowly, deliberately, into a community of about 400 souls. The buildings lined Main Street in weathered timber and whitewashed planks. A general store, a smithy, a modest church with a bell tower that hadn't rung in 30 years. And at the center of it all, the jailhouse that doubled as town hall. Amos Kett woke before dawn, as he had every morning for the past 67 years. His hands found the edge of his bed with practiced ease, feet touching the cool floorboards in the exact spot worn smooth by decades of the same movement. He dressed by touch and memory. Cotton shirt, wool trousers, suspenders that hung just so. Each button found its hole without hesitation. His fingers knew the work better than most men's eyes ever would. The carved oak walking staff leaned against the bedside table, smooth from years of handling. Amos ran his palm along its length, feeling the notches cut into the wood. 43 marks, each one representing something significant in Bellwick's history. The deep groove near the top marked the year the drought broke. The cluster of shallow cuts halfway down commemorated the winter when Doc Latimer saved 5 children from scarlet fever. The newest notch, carved 8 years back, remembered the day Anna died. He'd stopped adding marks after that. Until recently, nothing had felt worthy of remembering. The house around him whispered its familiar geography. 12 steps from bedroom to kitchen. The 4th board creaked under weight. The door frame stood exactly where his shoulder expected it. Amos moved through the space Anna had arranged for him. Everything positioned so he could navigate without sight, without doubt, without the constant reminder that he lived in darkness while the world moved in light. He prepared coffee by smell and sound, the hiss of the kettle, the rich aroma of grounds meeting hot water. He ate bread and butter at the small table, listening to Bellwick wake around him. Cartwheels on packed dirt, the smith's hammer beginning its morning rhythm, voices calling greetings across the street, Mrs. Brennan scolding her boys for running, old Hugh coughing on his porch. Amos knew every voice, every footfall, every routine. He'd learned to read the town like others, read newspapers. At 7 o'clock he stepped onto his porch. September air carried the scent of dry grass and wood smoke. He tapped his staff twice against the boards. A habit Anna used to tease him about, his way of announcing himself to the day. Morning. "Mayor," called Tobias Quinn from across the street. Amos turned toward the voice, smiled. "Tobias, you're early today. Sarah's been after me about fixing the back fence. Figured I'd get to the office before she finds more chores." The deputy's footsteps approached, boots on dirt, giving way to boots on wood as he climbed the porch steps. "You need a hand getting to town hall? I've been making that walk for 36 years. I think I can manage one more day." 37 years as mayor come November, Tobias said. There was something in his voice, pride mixed with concern. "That's got to be some kind of record." They walked together down Main Street, Amos's staff tapping a steady rhythm. He'd memorized every rut, every stone, every place where the boardwalk needed repair. Other folks were opening their shops now. Amos greeted them by name, by the sound of their movements, by the particular way each one occupied space. "Morning, Amos," said Pauline Driscoll, the school teacher. Her voice came from the right, near the church steps where she always stood at this hour, watching children arrive. I wanted to talk with you about the McGovern boy. He's been having trouble with the older students. Come by the office after lunch, Amos said. We'll sort it out. The town hall stood at the intersection of Main and Ridge Road, a two-story building that had served as jailhouse, courthouse, and administrative center since Bellwick's founding. 2 cells occupied the back room, rarely used. Most disputes got settled with words rather than bars. Inside, Tobias lit the lamps, unnecessary for Amos, but other folks would visit throughout the day. The office smelled of old paper, wood polish, and the faint metallic tang of the iron stove in the corner. Amos settled into his chair, the leather worn to match his shape. His desk held papers organized by touch, raised marks he'd had Tobias add years ago, a system of texture and position that let him locate any document within seconds. To his left, the town's record books. To his right, current correspondence. Center drawer held writing materials and the small wooden box where he kept Anna's locket. We've got the Miller-Thompson property dispute this morning, Tobias said, shuffling papers. Both families claiming the same fence line. Read me the original deed. Tobias's voice took on the formal cadence of legal documents. Amos listened, building a map in his mind. He'd walked that property line 20 years ago, felt the old stone markers with his own hands. He knew where the boundary ran. Tell them both to meet me at the disputed fence at 2 o'clock. We'll walk it together. You sure? It's rough ground out there. I've walked rougher. Amos leaned back in his chair. Anything else? Doc Latimer wants to talk about the railroad proposal. Says some folks are getting nervous about all the surveying crews in the area. The railroad. That topic had been simmering for months, ever since word spread that the Central Pacific was eyeing expansion routes through the territories. Some towns welcomed the iron rails and the commerce they brought. Others had been swallowed whole, their characters scraped away by progress. Tell Vincent I'll stop by his office this afternoon. The morning passed in its usual rhythm. Disputes mediated, decisions made, the small governance that kept a town running. Amos had learned long ago that leadership wasn't about grand gestures. It was about listening, really listening, to what people said and what they didn't say. His blindness had made him better at it. Without eyes to judge appearances, he heard the truth in voices, the hesitation before a lie, the pain beneath anger. Around noon, Pauline arrived with her concern about young McGovern. Amos listened as she described the problem. Older boys mocking the child's stutter, making school a misery. Bring the older boys to see me tomorrow morning, Amos said. Before school. I'll have a word with them. You always know what to say to children, Pauline observed. Even the difficult ones seem to listen to you. That's because I don't talk down to them. Never saw much point in that. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. Pauline, do you think the town still needs me? Truly? The question surprised her. He heard it in the sudden stillness. Amos Kett, what kind of fool question is that? An old man's question. I'm 67, Pauline. Been doing this job since I was 31. Maybe Bellwick needs someone younger, someone who can... He stopped himself. Someone who can see. Her voice had gone soft, understanding. Is that what you were going to say? The railroad situation needs someone who can look surveyors in the eye, read their contracts without help, travel to the territorial capital if necessary. I've been fortunate that Tobias handles most of that, but it's not fair to him or to the town. Pauline crossed the room. He heard the rustle of her skirt, felt her hand on his shoulder. You listen to me, Amos Kett. You see more than any sighted person in this town. You see into people's hearts. You see what matters. Don't you dare think your blindness makes you less capable. After she left, Amos sat alone in the quiet office. He ran his fingers over his walking staff, feeling those notches again. 43 moments of history, and him at the center of most of them. But how many more could he handle? How many more years did he have in him? He thought about Anna, as he often did in quiet moments. She'd believed in him when no one else would have considered a blind man for mayor. You don't need eyes to see what's right, she'd told him, the night before the first election. You've got something better. You've got wisdom, but wisdom felt heavier these days. The weight of all those years, all those decisions, all those voices depending on him. Evening brought Dr. Vincent Latimer to the office. Concern etched in his voice even before he spoke about the railroad. "There are rumors. Amos, the survey crews have been more thorough than usual. Some folks think the railroad's already made up its mind about the route. Through Bellwick? Through the eastern quarter. Would displace at least a dozen families. Maybe more." Amos absorbed this, turning it over in his mind. "And what do you think, Vincent?" The doctor took his time answering. They'd known each other 30 years, long enough for honest silence. "I think change is coming, whether we want it or not. The question is whether we have any say in how it happens." After Vincent left, Amos remained at his desk as darkness fell outside. Not that he noticed the difference. He heard Tobias banking the stove, preparing to lock up for the night. "You heading home, Mayor?" "In a bit. You go on. Sarah's probably got supper waiting." Alone again, Amos opened the center drawer and removed the wooden box. Inside, Anna's silver locket rested against velvet he couldn't see, but knew was deep blue, her favorite color. He'd carried this locket for 8 years, never opening it because he couldn't see what lay inside. Tobias had told him it held a small portrait of Anna at 30, painted by a traveling artist. Amos held the locket in his palm, feeling its weight, imagining what the portrait might look like. He'd touched Anna's face 1,000 times, memorized every curve and line with his fingertips. But he'd never seen her smile, never watched sunlight catch in her hair, never looked into her eyes and seen his own reflection there. Some days the blindness didn't matter. Some days it was everything. He returned the locket to its box, closed the drawer. Outside, Bellwick settled into its evening routines. Amos could hear old Hugh on his porch again, the creak of his rocking chair, keeping time like a metronome. Somewhere down Main Street, children were being called home for supper. The Smith's hammer had gone silent hours ago. This was his town. These were his people. And somewhere out there on a ridge road he'd never seen, surveyors were drawing lines that might erase it all. Amos stood, took up his staff, and made his way home through darkness that felt no different from the light. 3 days after the conversation with Dr. Latimer, Amos sat in his office reviewing land records. Tobias read them aloud, his voice steady but concerned. The survey maps showed boundary lines that didn't quite match the original territorial grants. Small discrepancies, but Amos had learned that small discrepancies often hid large intentions. "Something's not right about these measurements," Tobias said. "The eastern boundary shifts about 40 yards from where—" Heavy boots on the boardwalk outside interrupted him. Amos lifted his head, listening. 2 sets of footsteps, both unfamiliar. One walked with the deliberate pace of authority. The other moved lighter, more careful, like someone used to treading quietly in wild places. The door opened without a knock. "Mayor Amos Kett?" The voice belonged to the heavier footsteps, a man used to being obeyed. "That's right. And you are?" "U.S. Marshal Garrett Stowe." The marshal's boots crossed the office, stopping a few feet from the desk. "I'm here on federal business concerning a fugitive I've been tracking for 2 weeks. Amos heard Tobias stand, the scrape of his chair against floorboards. His deputy had that protective instinct, always had. "What fugitive?" Tobias asked, the woman standing beside me. "Well, she was a fugitive until about an hour ago when she surrendered voluntarily. On one condition." The second person spoke then, a woman's voice weathered like old leather, carrying the quiet of high country and long silences. "I need 10 minutes alone with Mayor Kett. No questions, no interference." Amos turned his face toward her voice. There was something familiar in it, though he knew they'd never met. An echo of something from long ago, like hearing a melody you'd forgotten you knew. "Ma'am, I don't believe we've been introduced. My name is Ressa Vale." She moved closer, and Amos caught the scent of sage and wood smoke, leather and mountain air. "I've come a long way to see you, Mayor. Down from the high country, across 3 territories. Been walking for near about a month to get here. And why would a fugitive travel that far to speak with me?" Marshal Stowe cleared his throat. "That's what I'd like to know. Miss Vale here is wanted for crimes against the territorial government, theft, fraud, possibly murder. She's been evading federal authorities for close to 20 years. Then 2 weeks ago, she walks into a Marshal station in Silver Creek and says she'll surrender if I bring her to Bellwick first. Says she has business with you that can't wait. What kind of business? The kind I can't discuss with an audience, Ressa said. Her voice held steady, no pleading in it. 10 minutes, Mayor, that's all I'm asking. After that, the Marshal can take me wherever he needs to. Tobias spoke up. Amos, I don't like this. Woman could be dangerous. If I meant harm, I wouldn't have surrendered myself first, Ressa said quietly. I'm 53 years old and bone-tired. I'm not here to hurt anybody, Amos considered. Every instinct told him to refuse, to let the Marshal handle federal business without involving himself. But that echo in her voice kept pulling at him, that sense of something important he couldn't quite name. Marshal, I assume you've searched her for weapons? Thoroughly. She's clean except for what's in that satchel she's carrying, and I've looked through it. Nothing dangerous, though I'll admit it's peculiar. Then I'll give her the 10 minutes she's asking for. Amos stood, feeling for his desk's edge. Tobias, you and the Marshal can wait outside. Amos, it's all right. I've handled difficult conversations before. He heard Tobias's reluctance in the pause that followed, but his deputy knew better than to argue when Amos had made up his mind. The two men left, boots heavy with disapproval. The door closed. Amos and Ressa Vale stood alone in the office. You can sit if you'd like, Amos said, gesturing toward the chair across from his desk. I'd rather stand. She moved closer, and he heard the soft thump of a leather satchel being set on the desk. I need you to understand something first, Mayor. I'm not here by accident. I've been planning this moment for 8 years, ever since your wife Anna passed. Amos felt his breath catch. You knew Anna? No, but I knew your grandmother, Constance Kett. Knew her well. His grandmother. Amos had only the dimmest memories of her. A voice that sang old songs, hands that smelled of herbs, a presence that filled a room. She died when he was 7 years old. My grandmother passed 60 years ago. I was 10 when I met her, Ressa said. She was living in the high country then, after she left Bellwick. My parents died that winter. Fever took them both within 3 days of each other. Your grandmother found me half frozen in the mountains, brought me to her cabin, taught me things. What kind of things? The old ways. Things most folks have forgotten or never believed in the first place. Ressa's voice carried weight now, the kind that came from bearing heavy truths alone. She was a keeper, Mayor, one of the last. And she told me that someday Bellwick would need its mayor to truly see what was coming. Said she'd had a dream about it, clear as daylight. A railroad, men with papers and guns. A town that could vanish if the right person didn't stand up at the right time. A dream. Amos heard the skepticism in his own voice. Your grandmother's dreams weren't like regular dreams. She saw futures, possibilities. The keepers always did. Ressa paused. She told me that when the time came, I'd know. Said I'd feel it in my bones, the knowing. 8 years ago, I felt it. Started making my way here, but the federal marshals had been hunting me for years. Had to move careful, move slow. Why are they hunting you? Because I know things they don't want known. Because I tried to stop something I should have stopped years earlier. Her voice roughened with old pain. But that's not important right now. What's important is this. He heard her unlatch the satchel, the rustle of cloth being moved aside. Your grandmother made me promise, Mayor. Said one day Bellwick would need you to truly see. Not just understand, not just hear, see. She gave me something to hold for you, said I'd know when to pass it on. I was born blind, Miss Vale. Whatever your grandmother thought, she knew you were blind. That was the whole point. Ressa's hands moved again, lifting something from the satchel. There are things in this world that don't follow the rules folks think they know. Your grandmother understood that. She was born with the gift of sight, in more ways than one. Amos felt something shift in the air, a warmth that hadn't been there before. Not heat exactly, but presence. What are you holding? A stone. Old as the mountains, maybe older. It's been passed down through keepers for more generations than I can count. Your grandmother held it for 30 years before she passed it to me. Ressa moved around the desk, standing close enough that Amos could feel her breath. It does one thing, Mayor, just one. But it's something most folks would give their whole lives for. And what's that? It gives sight to those who are meant to see. Amos almost laughed, but something stopped him. The absolute certainty in her voice. the warmth growing stronger, pulsing like a heartbeat he could feel against his face. That's not possible. A lot of things aren't possible until they are. Ressa lifted the stone higher. Your grandmother saw this moment 60 years ago. Saw you sitting in this office, blind but wise, with a railroad coming that would destroy everything if someone didn't stand against it with both wisdom and sight. She prepared this for you. Why didn't she give it to me herself? Because it wouldn't have worked then. You had to live your whole life in darkness first. Had to learn to see without eyes. Only then could the stone show you what you need to see now. Amos felt her hand on his shoulder, gentle but insistent. I'm going to place this stone against your eyes, Mayor. Don't be afraid. It won't hurt. Miss Vale, Ressa, call me Ressa. Her voice softened. Your grandmother loved you. This is her gift, her protection for the town she left behind. Trust her. Trust me. And somehow, impossibly, Amos did. He felt the stone touch his closed eyelids. Smooth, warm, thrumming with something he had no words for. The warmth spread across his face, down his neck, filling his head with a brightness that should have been terrifying but felt instead like coming home. Then the darkness that had been his entire world began to crack open, letting in the light. Light, not darkness pierced by light, but light itself, overwhelming, incomprehensible, beautiful and terrifying all at once. Amos gasped, his hands flying up to his face, touching his own cheeks as if to confirm he still existed in a world that had suddenly exploded into something entirely new. Colors he had no names for, shapes without context. A face before him, Ressa's face, lined and weathered, grey eyes watching him with something like tenderness, something like sorrow. Easy now, she said softly. Don't try to make sense of it all at once. But sense was impossible. His brain scrambled to process 67 years of visual deprivation, ending in a single moment. He saw his own hands next, aged, spotted with decades of sun he'd never known he'd felt. Fingers that looked foreign despite belonging to him. The grain in the wooden desk. The lamp burning in the corner, flame dancing in glass. Papers scattered across the desk's surface, covered in marks that he knew were letters but looked like nothing but scratches. The room spun. Amos grabbed for the desk's edge, his knees buckling. Ressa caught his arm, steadied him. Breathe, Mayor, just breathe. He forced air into his lungs, tried to anchor himself. But how could he anchor to a world that had transformed so completely? Everything he knew by touch and sound now had visual form. Wrong, strange, too much. I can see, he whispered. The words felt inadequate, ridiculous. God help me, I can see. Ressa wrapped the stone back in its cloth, returned it to the satchel. As soon as it left contact with his skin, Amos expected the darkness to return. But his eyes remained open, his vision clear, impossible, miraculous, terrifying. How? His voice cracked. How is this possible? The stone gives what the keeper needs it to give. For you, it's sight. Ressa's face showed lines of exhaustion, something deeper than physical tiredness. But understand, Mayor, it gives and it also takes. You'll learn what that means soon enough. Before Amos could ask what she meant, the door burst open. Tobias rushed in, Marshal Stowe close behind. They stopped short when they saw Amos's face, the tears streaming down his cheeks, the wide-eyed shock of someone seeing the world for the first time. What did you do to him? Tobias demanded, moving to Amos's side. I gave him what he needed, Ressa said quietly. Amos turned toward Tobias, seeing his deputy for the first time. A man in his early 40s, strong-jawed, with kind eyes and a scar along his left temple from a riding accident years ago. Amos had felt that scar many times, but never imagined how it would look. Brown hair going grey at the edges. Concern written across his features. Tobias, Amos breathed. I can see you. I can see your face. His deputy went pale. That's not possible. Get Doc Latimer, Marshal Stowe ordered. Right now, Tobias ran. Amos heard his boots pounding down the boardwalk, heard him shouting for the doctor. But his attention stayed fixed on the room around him, the office he'd navigated by touch for 36 years. now revealed in shapes and colors and depths he'd never imagined. Dr. Vincent Latimer arrived within minutes, his medical bag in hand. Amos saw him for the first time. A man in his late 50s, graying beard, spectacles perched on a nose that bent slightly to the left from an old break. The doctor's hands shook as he approached. "Amos, I need to examine you. I can see, Vincent. I can see everything." Vincent pulled a small lamp close, directed the light into Amos's eyes. Amos flinched at the brightness but held still. The doctor's face cycled through disbelief, confusion, something close to fear. "This isn't possible," Vincent muttered. "Your eyes show the same congenital cataracts you've had since birth. The corneas are completely opaque. There's no medical pathway for vision with eyes in this condition. Yet I can see," Amos said. He pointed at objects around the room, naming them. The lamp on the desk, the wanted posters on the wall, the crack in the ceiling plaster above the doorframe. "Your spectacles have a small chip in the left lens." Vincent removed his glasses, stared at them. The chip was there, barely visible, something Amos couldn't possibly have known. Marshal Stowe stepped forward, his hand resting on the revolver at his hip. He looked at Ressa with open suspicion. "What kind of witchcraft is this?" "Not witchcraft," Ressa replied. "Something older. Something most folks forgot how to believe in." "I don't believe in magic. Don't have to believe in something for it to be real, Marshal." Ressa met his gaze without flinching. "You've got your prisoner. I've fulfilled my obligation. Do what you need to do." But Stowe looked uncertain now, his worldview clearly shaken. He glanced at Amos, at Vincent, back to Ressa. "I need to send a telegram to my superiors. Figure out what to do about—" He gestured vaguely at Amos. "Whatever this is." Word spread through Bellwick like wildfire. By sunset, half the town had gathered outside the jailhouse, voices rising in confusion and wonder. Some called it a miracle, others called it devilry. Amos sat in his office, still reeling, while Tobias stood guard at the door to keep the curious at bay. Pauline Driscoll pushed her way through, insisting on seeing him. When she entered and met his eyes, truly met them, she stopped in her tracks. "Amos?" "Hello, Pauline." He saw her clearly for the first time, a woman in her mid-50s, dark hair streaked with silver, pulled back in a practical bun. Intelligence and warmth in her brown eyes. A face he'd known by voice for decades, now made real. She crossed to him, took his hands in hers. "How do you feel?" "Lost," he admitted. "Everything I knew, every way I understood the world. It's all different now. I can see the room, but I don't know how to walk through it anymore. I can see faces, but I can't read them the way I read voices. You'll learn, will I?" He looked down at their joined hands. "I'm 67 years old, Pauline. How do I learn to live in a sighted world after a lifetime of blindness?" She squeezed his hands gently. "The same way you learned to lead this town blind, one step at a time." Marshal Stowe had placed Ressa in one of the cells, not locked, but confined until he figured out what to do with her. As evening deepened, Amos made his way to the back room, seeing the bars for the first time, the narrow cot, the small window set high in the wall. Ressa sat on the cot, her hands folded in her lap, looking more at peace than any prisoner should. "You said the stone gives and takes," Amos said. "What does it take?" She looked up at him, those grey eyes ancient with knowledge. "You'll understand when the time comes. But know this, Mayor, you didn't get this gift for free. Nothing worth having is free." "Then tell me. I deserve to know. You deserve to discover it yourself." Ressa stood, approached the bars. "Your grandmother saw what was coming for Bellwick. She knew you'd need more than wisdom to stop it. But she also knew that sight comes with a price. The stone shows truth, Mayor, all of it. The good, the bad, the things most folks protect themselves from seeing. Can you handle that?" Amos thought about the faces he'd seen today, not just their features, but the emotions written across them. Fear, doubt, suspicion. He'd heard those things in voices before, but seeing them was different. More immediate. More painful. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "That's the right answer." Ressa returned to the cot. "Now go home, Mayor. Rest. Tomorrow you'll start learning what it really means to see." Amos walked home alone as darkness fell. True darkness this time. visible darkness. He'd spent his whole life in a world without light and shadow. Now he could see both, and somehow the shadows felt heavier than the darkness ever had. Inside his house, he lit a lamp and stood in the kitchen, looking at the space Anna had arranged. Everything positioned for a blind man's navigation. Everything marked by her love and care. He opened the center drawer of his desk and removed the wooden box. His hands trembled as he lifted the locket, opened the catch. Anna's face looked back at him from the small painted portrait, young, vibrant, smiling. Dark hair framing delicate features, blue eyes bright with life. She'd been beautiful. He'd always known it in his way, through touch and voice. But seeing her, truly seeing her, broke something open in his chest. Amos wept. Holding the locket, grief and gratitude tangled together until he couldn't tell them apart. Morning came too bright, too harsh. Amos woke with his eyes aching, his head pounding from yesterday's sensory overload. He'd barely slept, his mind unable to quiet in the face of so much new information. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw after-images, faces, colors, the overwhelming complexity of a visible world. He tried to dress himself, reaching for clothes by memory. His hand knocked over the water pitcher. He misjudged the distance to his bed, stumbled. Everything felt wrong. Depth perception, spatial awareness. The simple mechanics of moving through a room he'd navigated perfectly in darkness. After 20 frustrating minutes, he managed to dress, though his shirt hung crooked and his suspenders twisted. The man in the mirror, there was a mirror now, something he'd never needed before, looked disheveled, exhausted. Eyes red from crying and lack of sleep. Tobias arrived to help him to the town hall. Found him sitting on the porch steps. Rough night? I knocked over everything in my kitchen trying to make coffee, Amos admitted. Walked into the door frame twice. Nearly fell down my own stairs. 67 years of knowing how to move, and now I'm clumsy as a child. It'll get easier. Will it? Amos looked at his deputy, studied his face, the concern there, the uncertainty. How long before I learned to trust my eyes the way I trusted my other senses? They walked to the office together, Tobias guiding him when necessary. Crowds still lingered on Main Street, people watching, whispering. Amos saw their faces now, the wonder, the fear, the suspicion. Some looked at him like he'd been touched by God. Others looked at him like he'd made a deal with the devil. Mrs. Brennan called out from the general store. Is it true, Mayor? Can you really see? It's true. How? I don't fully understand it myself, Mrs. Brennan. At the office, Marshal Stowe waited with a grim expression. He'd aged overnight, looked like a man whose certainties had crumbled. I sent the telegram, he said. My superiors want me to bring Miss Vale to the territorial capital immediately. They also want a full report on, he gestured at Amos, this situation. What will happen to her? Trial, most likely. She's wanted for serious crimes. What crimes exactly? Stowe pulled out a weathered wanted poster, spread it on the desk. Amos looked at it, saw Ressa's face, younger but unmistakable, above text listing charges. Theft of territorial property, fraud, conspiracy, murder. Murder? Amos felt his stomach tighten. Allegedly. The details are complicated. Stowe folded the poster. But she surrendered herself, which counts for something. I need to talk to her. You've got 10 minutes. We leave at noon. Amos made his way to the cells. Ressa stood at the window, light streaming through the bars. She turned as he approached, studied him with those ancient grey eyes, learning what sight costs yet. I can barely walk through my own house, Amos said. Everything I knew is wrong now. Not wrong, different. She moved to the bars. Your other senses were refined by necessity. Now your vision's drowning them out. You'll find balance eventually. The Marshal says you're wanted for murder. I am. Did you kill anyone? Ressa's face showed old pain. Not directly. But I'm responsible for deaths all the same. Signed papers I shouldn't have signed. Trusted people I shouldn't have trusted. By the time I realized what I'd enabled, good people were dead. Tell me. She took a long breath. 23 years ago, I was Commissioner Ressa Vale. Worked for the Territorial Land Office, approved railroad grants and property transfers. I thought I was helping build a future, bringing progress, connecting communities. Then I started seeing the pattern. Families displaced, land seized, violence against anyone who resisted. The railroad companies weren't building a future. They were destroying one. Her voice roughened with old anger. I tried to stop it. Gathered evidence, prepared to testify. They framed me first. Said I'd embezzled funds, forged documents, even killed a clerk who was going to expose me. Truth is, they killed him to keep him quiet. I ran before they could stage my arrest and execution. And the stone. Found it 2 years into hiding. Met a keeper in the mountains who saw something in me. Maybe my grandmother's gift passed through blood. I don't know. She taught me the old ways, gave me purpose again. I've spent 20 years trying to undo the damage I caused. Amos gripped the bars, his new vision showing him the sincerity in her face, the burden she carried. Your grandmother was the one who told me about Bellwick, Ressa continued. Told me to wait, to keep the stones safe until the town needed you to see what was coming. She knew the railroad would try here eventually. Knew you'd need more than hearing to stop them. What's coming exactly? Same thing that's destroyed a dozen other towns. Men with papers and guns, legal theft dressed up as progress. They'll come with contracts that look fair, but hide clauses that give them everything. They'll pressure, bribe, threaten. And if that doesn't work, she paused, they'll use force. When? Soon, maybe days, maybe weeks. But they're already here, Mayor. Those survey crews aren't just surveying. They're planning. Marshal Stowe's voice called from the front office. Time's up, Mayor. Amos looked at Ressa, this woman who'd given up her freedom to deliver a gift from his grandmother. What will happen to you? I'll stand trial. Maybe they'll listen this time, maybe they won't, but I kept my promise. That's what matters. The stone, you said it takes as well as gives. What does it take from me? Ressa's expression softened, something like pity in her eyes. You're bound now, Mayor, bound to protect what you see. You can't unknow what your eyes show you. Can't ignore truth once you've witnessed it. That's the cost. Some folks would rather live blind than bear that weight. She reached through the bars, touched his hand briefly. Your grandmother believed you were strong enough. I hope she was right. Stowe came to escort Ressa out. Amos watched them leave, the Marshal grim and dutiful, Ressa calm and resigned. Half the town gathered to watch her departure, faces showing confusion and judgment in equal measure. Pauline appeared at Amos's side as the Marshal's wagon rolled away. What did she tell you? That I'm responsible now, for what I see, for what I do about it. You've always been responsible, Amos, but I could hide before. Could say I didn't know, couldn't see, couldn't understand certain things. He looked at her directly, held her gaze. Now I can. And that changes everything. That afternoon, Amos stood at the ridge overlooking Bellwick. Tobias had brought him here, helped him climb the slope. From this vantage point, Amos saw his town for the first time. The scatter of buildings, the church steeple, smoke rising from chimneys. The valley spreading out in brown grass and scrub brush. Mountains rising in the distance. It was smaller than he'd imagined. More vulnerable. A collection of wooden structures that could burn in an hour, be dismantled in a week, erased from memory in a generation. This is what your grandmother wanted you to see, Tobias said quietly. Not just the beauty, the fragility. Amos nodded, understanding settling over him like a weight. The stone had given him sight, but more than that, it had given him obligation. He couldn't lead this town from the comfortable darkness of not seeing anymore. He saw now. And seeing, he would have to act. 5 days after Ressa's departure, Amos had adapted enough to move through his world with something approaching confidence. His vision still overwhelmed him at times. Too much color, too much detail, but he was learning to filter, to focus, to use his eyes in conjunction with his other senses, rather than letting them dominate. He wore a wide-brimmed hat now to manage light sensitivity. Small things like that helped. So did Tobias's patient guidance and Pauline's steady encouragement. The town had mostly accepted his transformation, though some still whispered about witchcraft when they thought he couldn't hear, but he could hear. And now he could see their faces when they whispered. The railroad representatives arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 men in suits that looked expensive even to Amos's inexperienced eye. They rode in a carriage with the company name emblazoned on the side, pulled by horses groomed to a shine Amos had never known existed. He watched from his office window as they climbed down, brushed dust from their clothes, surveyed the town with the appraising eyes of men who saw property rather than people. Tobias stood beside him. "That's Harrison Vicks in front, lead negotiator for the Central Pacific expansion. The others are his surveying crew." Amos studied Vicks, a man in his mid-40s, dark hair slicked back, confident stride. But it was his eyes that caught Amos's attention. Cold eyes, calculating, the kind that saw obstacles rather than human beings. "Show them in." The meeting began cordially enough. Vicks introduced himself and his associates, laid out leather cases filled with documents. He spread a large map across Amos's desk, a detailed survey of Bellwick and the surrounding territory. "Mayor Kett, I understand you've experienced something of a medical miracle recently." Vicks's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I hope your newfound sight helps you see the opportunity we're offering Bellwick. Tell me about this opportunity." Vicks traced a line across the map with his finger. "The Central Pacific is expanding its mountain route. We're offering generous compensation for a right-of-way through your eastern quarter. Fair market value plus 20%. It's an excellent deal." Amos leaned over the map, seeing details he would have missed before. The proposed route cut through 12 family properties, crossed the old cemetery, and skirted dangerously close to the town's main water source. This route would displace a dozen families. We'll compensate them handsomely, enough to relocate and start fresh elsewhere, and if they don't want to relocate, if this is their home. Vicks's smile tightened. "Progress requires some sacrifice, Mayor. Surely you understand that. The railroad will bring commerce, opportunity, growth. Bellwick will thrive." Amos studied the map more carefully, his new vision catching something odd. The surveyor's marks, the property boundaries, they didn't quite match the records he'd reviewed with Tobias. Some signatures on attached documents looked familiar in a way that raised his suspicions. "I'll need time to review these documents thoroughly. Consult with the affected families, of course." Vicks gathered the papers with practiced efficiency. "We'll be staying at the boarding house. Please, take all the time you need. Though I should mention, this offer has a deadline. 2 weeks from today." After they left, Amos sat in silence, looking at the documents they'd left behind. His eyes caught details he would have missed blind. Subtle inconsistencies in dates, signatures that looked traced rather than original, clauses buried in dense legal language. Tobias returned from escorting the railroad men out. "What do you think?" "I think something's wrong. These property boundaries don't match our records. Could be surveying errors, could be, or could be deliberate." Amos pointed to a signature at the bottom of a deed transfer. "Look at this. See how the ink's a slightly different shade? And the handwriting, it matches another signature on a document we have in our ledger. A document dated 6 months ago." Tobias leaned closer. "You're saying someone forged these?" "I'm saying we need to check our deed records. Every property sale in the eastern quarter for the past year. They spent the afternoon reviewing documents. Amos's vision proved invaluable. He could compare signatures, spot inconsistencies in ink and paper quality, see patterns that would have been invisible to him before. By evening, they'd uncovered 8 suspicious transactions, all involving properties along the proposed railroad route. "Someone's been buying up land through fraud," Tobias said, "preparing for the railroad's arrival, and making sure the price stays low by ensuring the sellers don't know what's coming." Amos felt anger building. "This is exactly what Ressa warned me about." That evening, Dr. Latimer visited with concerns from the community. Amos saw worry etched in his old friend's features, the weight of responsibility they both carried. "Some families are excited about the railroad money," Vincent said. "Others are terrified of losing their homes. The town's dividing, Amos. We need guidance. I need more information first. Can you gather the families along the proposed route?" Tomorrow evening, town hall meeting. After Vincent left, Amos remained in his office, studying the forged documents. His new sight let him see the crime clearly. The manipulation, the careful planning, the coldness of men who saw human lives as obstacles to profit. Pauline arrived with dinner she'd brought from home. and found him hunched over paperwork. "You're going to ruin your new eyes if you don't rest them. There's too much to see." She set the food down, pulled up a chair. "My brother lost his farm to railroad pressure in another county. They came with papers that looked legal, pressure that felt like violence. By the time he understood what he'd signed, it was too late." "What happened to him?" "He works at a mill now. Makes enough to survive, but lost the land that had been in our family 3 generations. Her voice carried old pain. "Don't let that happen to Bellwick, Amos." After she left, Amos walked through the darkening town. His first real walk at night, seeing lanterns lit in windows, stars emerging overhead, the play of shadow and light that had been foreign to him his entire life. He saw Bellwick's vulnerability now, not just to the railroad, but to any force with enough power and ruthlessness. These wooden buildings, these dirt streets, these people who trusted him to protect them. It was all so fragile. At the boarding house, light glowed in the windows where Vix and his associates stayed. Amos stood across the street watching. He saw Vix at a desk, writing something, his face cold and focused even in private. This was what Ressa had meant about the stone's cost. Amos could see truth now, in forged documents, in calculating eyes, in the threat hanging over his town. And seeing it, he couldn't ignore it. Couldn't pretend it wasn't happening. The obligation sat heavy on his shoulders, but for the first time since gaining sight, Amos felt grateful for it. His grandmother had known, had seen this moment 60 years ago and prepared him for it. He returned to his office, pulled out the deed ledger, and began making careful notes. Every suspicious signature, every questionable transaction, every piece of evidence. If Vix thought a blind mayor would be easy to deceive, he'd underestimated how well Amos had learned to see, both before the stone and after. Tomorrow he'd confront this threat properly. Tonight he'd prepare. At his desk, Amos opened the drawer and looked at Anna's locket again. Her young face smiled up at him, full of life and hope. He touched the portrait gently. "I wish you could see what I'm seeing," he whispered. "Or maybe you always did." He closed the locket, returned it to the drawer. Then he picked up his pen and continued working, his new eyes seeing clearly in the lamplight. The town meeting drew nearly the entire population of Bellwick. Families crowded into the hall, standing room only, voices rising in concern and confusion. Amos stood at the front, seeing their faces clearly. Fear, hope, desperation, greed. All of it visible now in ways it never had been before. Harrison Vix sat in the front row, flanked by his associates, confident smile fixed in place. He nodded politely to Amos, the picture of reasonable civility. Amos let the crowd settle before speaking. "I've called you all here to discuss the railroad proposal. Before we begin, I want to show you something." He held up the deed ledger, the town's official property record. Over the past 6 months, 8 properties along the proposed railroad route have changed hands. Every one of these transactions involves signatures that don't match the original owner's writing. In other words, forgeries. The room erupted in noise. Vix's smile faltered. "That's a serious accusation, Mayor," he said, standing. "Do you have proof?" "I do." Amos spread several documents across the table. His eyes traced the evidence he'd compiled. These signatures belong to Michael Thompson, Emma Richardson, and William Cross. Compare them to the signatures on the railroad transfer documents. The differences are clear. Different ink, different hand pressure, different letter formations. Several townspeople moved closer to examine the documents. Amos saw realization dawn on their faces. "Someone's been systematically defrauding property owners," he continued. "Buying land at devalued prices, using forged documents, preparing for the railroad's arrival. When the railroad came with their generous offer, they'd be buying property from the fraudulent owners, not the original families." Vix's face had gone cold. "I assure you, Mayor, the Central Pacific had no knowledge of any fraudulent—" "I'm not accusing the railroad yet." Amos met his eyes directly. "But someone in your network has been laying groundwork for months. Someone who knew exactly where your route would go before you publicly announced it." The meeting dissolved into heated discussion. Some families demanded investigation. Others, who'd been tempted by the railroad money, now saw the trap they'd nearly walked into. After the crowd dispersed, Tobias approached with news. "One of the survey crew wants to talk. Young man named Owen says he has information but needs protection." They met Owen at the church, away from curious eyes. The young surveyor looked miserable, guilt written across his features that Amos could now read clearly. "I couldn't keep quiet anymore," Owen said. "What Mr. Vix is doing, it's wrong. I've got a wife, 2 children, needed the work. But I can't be part of this. Tell us what you know. Vix has done this in 3 other towns. Creates a shell company, buys devalued land through fraud or pressure, then resells to the railroad at massive profit. The company gets their route. Vix gets rich and the towns," he paused, "the towns get destroyed. Families displaced, communities broken apart. Can you testify to this? If you can protect my family, Vix has men who don't mind using violence when persuasion fails." Amos looked at Tobias, saw the same determination in his deputy's face that he felt in his own chest. "We'll protect you, and your testimony will help us stop this." That night, Amos lay awake, processing everything. The fraud, the conspiracy, the scope of what they were facing. It was bigger than one railroad deal, bigger than Bellwick. It was a pattern of corruption that had destroyed other towns, and would continue destroying more unless someone stood against it. In darkness, real darkness now. Not the familiar void he'd lived in before. Amos missed his blindness for a moment. Missed the simplicity of not seeing, not knowing, not bearing the weight of visible truth, but the moment passed. His grandmother had chosen this for him. Ressa had traveled months to deliver it, and Bellwick needed him to see clearly. The next morning, urgent news arrived. Marshal Stowe had returned to town, his expression grim. "Mayor Kett, we need to talk, privately." In the office, Stowe pulled out a folder thick with documents. "I did some investigating after I delivered Miss Vale to the territorial capital. Something about her story stuck with me. So I went through old case files, talked to some retired marshals who worked the original investigation, and she was telling the truth. 23 years ago, Ressa Vale was a land commissioner who tried to expose railroad corruption. The people she accused framed her for their crimes, and we, federal marshals, we hunted her like a criminal while the real criminals went free." Amos felt something shift in his understanding. "What happens now?" "I filed papers to reopen her case. It'll take time, but I think we can clear her name." Stowe leaned forward. "But that's not why I came back. I came to warn you. Harrison Vix's real name is Harrison Blackwell. He's wanted in connection with several violent incidents in towns that resisted his land schemes. If you're standing in his way, I am, then you need to be careful. This man doesn't just use lawyers and paperwork. He uses fear. And when fear doesn't work..." Stowe left the sentence unfinished, but his meaning was clear. That afternoon, as Amos reviewed documents in his office, he heard unfamiliar footsteps approaching. Heavy, deliberate, the walk of men used to intimidation. 3 of them entering without knocking. They weren't Vix's surveying crew. These were different. Hard faces, cold eyes, the kind of men hired for work that required violence rather than negotiation. Mayor Kett, the lead man's voice, carried threat like a blade. "Mr. Vix asked us to deliver a message. Stop interfering with railroad business. Accept the offer on the table. And maybe some of those property fraud charges you've been looking into could disappear." Amos stood slowly, meeting the man's eyes. His new vision showed him every detail. The gun poorly concealed under the man's coat. The stance that spoke of practiced violence. The complete lack of conscience in his face. "Tell Mr. Vix I don't accept bribes, and I don't respond well to threats. That's unfortunate, old man, because the next message won't be delivered with words." They left, but their presence lingered like smoke. Tobias returned from an errand, saw Amos's expression. "What happened?" "Vix is escalating, sending men to threaten me directly. We should contact the territorial marshal's office, request protection. That'll take weeks. We have days." Amos looked out the window at his town, seeing people going about their lives, unaware of the violence hanging over them. "No, we handle this ourselves." Pauline arrived at sunset with food and found Amos and Tobias planning. She set down the basket, crossed her arms. I heard about Vix's men visiting. The whole town's heard. Word travels fast, faster when people are scared. She moved closer. Amos, I know you want to protect this town, but you can't do it alone. Let us help. This could get dangerous. It's already dangerous. You think we don't see that? Her voice carried steel beneath the warmth. This is our town too. Our homes, our families. If you're standing against Vix, we stand with you. After she left, Amos stood at the window, watching evening settle over Bellwick. His town, his responsibility. The burden of sight felt heavier than ever. He could see the danger clearly, see the forces arrayed against them, see how fragile their position was. But he could also see determination in the faces of people like Pauline and Tobias and Owen. Could see the strength in community, the power of people choosing to stand together. Ressa had been right. The stone showed truth, and the truth was both terrifying and beautiful. Marshal Stowe appeared at the door. Got your message. I'll stay in town, provide what protection I can. But Mayor, if Vix has hired guns coming, we'll need more than law and paperwork to stop them. I know. Amos touched the pocket where he'd placed the small cloth-wrapped stone Ressa had left with him. She'd insisted he keep it, said he might need it again. At the time, he hadn't understood. Now he did. Marshal, how long before Vix makes his next move? Soon. Men like him don't like being told no. And they really don't like being exposed. Stowe checked his revolver. You should prepare for the worst. Amos nodded, his new eyes seeing clearly what preparation meant. Not just documents and legal arguments, but defense, protection. The possibility of violence he'd hoped to avoid. That night he opened the cloth and looked at the stone again. It pulsed with faint warmth, barely visible light. Ressa had told him it could do more than grant sight. Could show intent, predict movement, guide action in ways that went beyond normal seeing. But using it that way came with a cost. She'd warned him, and costs, once paid, couldn't be refunded. Still, Amos wrapped the stone carefully and returned it to his pocket. If the price of protecting Bellwick was his sight or his life, he'd pay it. 2 days before Vix's deadline, Amos requested one final meeting with Ressa. Marshal Stowe had brought her back from the territorial capital while her case was being reviewed. House arrest rather than jail. A small mercy while the legal system worked through decades of lies. She stayed at the boarding house under Stowe's supervision. When Amos arrived, the marshal agreed to give them privacy. Though he remained outside the door, Ressa looked thinner, more tired. But her eyes held the same ancient clarity they always had. You're preparing for a fight, she said. Not a question. Vix won't back down. His men made that clear, and you've discovered what the stone can really do. Amos pulled the wrapped stone from his pocket, set it on the table between them. You said it shows intent, that I could use it to see what's coming before it happens. I did, but you didn't tell me the full cost of using it that way. Ressa's expression softened with something like sorrow. Would you have believed me if I had? Some things have to be experienced to be understood, Mayor. Tell me now. All of it. She took a long breath, her gaze distant with memory. I need to start at the beginning. The real beginning. She paused. 23 years ago, I wasn't just a land commissioner. I was ambitious, hungry for success, blind in my own way to what I was really enabling. You told me this already. I told you part of it. Ressa's hands clasped together, knuckles white. What I didn't tell you was who recruited me, who trained me, who made me believe I was doing good while doing harm. She stood, moved to the window, her back to him. His name then was Marcus Blackwell. He'd go by other names later, one of them being Harrison Vix. Amos felt the room tilt. Vix worked with you? More than that. He was my superior, my mentor. I trusted him completely. The words came hard now, each one carrying weight. He taught me how to evaluate land deals, how to process railroad grants, how to see development opportunities. What he really taught me was how to ignore the human cost of progress. She turned back to face him. I signed documents he put in front of me. Approved transfers I should have questioned. By the time I realized the pattern, families displaced, communities destroyed, violence against anyone who resisted, I was complicit in it all. And when I finally gathered evidence to expose him, he framed me first. The murder charge. A clerk named William Cooper. He'd been gathering evidence too, was going to testify. Vix had him killed. Made it look like I'd done it to cover my embezzlement. I ran because I knew no one would believe a junior commissioner over a respected senior official. Amos processed this. Pieces falling into place. So Vix has been doing this for over 20 years. And he's here now because he's hunting the keepers. Hunting the stones. Ressa's voice dropped. That's the part I couldn't tell you before. Couldn't tell anyone, not even the Marshal. She pulled out a small leather portfolio, opened it to reveal old papers, documents, sketches, letters in various hands. About a year after I fled, I found a keeper. Old woman named Constance who lived in the mountains. Your grandmother? Though I didn't know it then. She saw something in me, maybe saw that I was seeking redemption. She taught me about the stones, about the old ways, about what the keepers protect. Amos stared at the documents. Some were in his grandmother's handwriting. There are 4 stones, Ressa continued, each with different abilities. The one I gave you grants sight, physical and metaphorical. Another shows futures, possibilities, the way your grandmother saw. A third reveals truth, makes lies impossible in its presence. The 4th, she paused. The 4th can bend will, make people believe whatever the holder wants them to believe. And Vix knows about these? He killed a keeper 10 years ago, tortured the location of one stone out of him before he died. Vix has been using it ever since, manipulating town councils, corrupting officials, making people see his deals as beneficial when they're actually destructive. She spread the documents on the table. Amos saw letters, reports, evidence of Vix's activities across multiple territories. I've been tracking him for years, trying to stay ahead of him, warning keepers, moving the stones to safer locations. But he's getting closer, more determined. Your grandmother knew he'd come to Bellwick eventually. That's why she prepared you. Amos felt the weight of revelation settling over him. So this was never just about the railroad. It's about the stones. The railroad deal is real. Vix does make money from it. But his real goal is finding the remaining stones. He believes if he collects all 4, he'll have complete power. See the future, bend reality, control truth itself. Where are the other stones? Hidden, held by keepers I won't name, not even to you. Ressa met his eyes. But Vix knows I'm here. Knows I gave you sight. He'll assume I told you where the others are. Understanding crashed over Amos like cold water. He's coming for me, for you, for the stone. Yes, and he won't come alone. He'll bring every gun he can hire, use every ounce of power his corrupted stone gives him. This fight, it's bigger than Bellwick's land, Mayor. It's about stopping him from getting stronger. Because if he collects all 4 stones, she didn't finish. She didn't need to. Marshal Stowe burst through the door, his face urgent. We've got riders coming. 8 men, heavily armed. They'll reach town by sunset. Amos stood, his mind racing through implications. Vix wasn't just a corrupt businessman. He was something more dangerous. Someone who'd tasted power beyond normal human limits and become addicted to it. How much time do we have? Maybe 2 hours. Ressa gathered the documents, pressed them into Amos's hands. Everything I know about Vix is in here. His methods, his crimes, evidence that could put him away for life if we survive to present it. But Mayor, you need to understand what you're facing. The stone he has, the one that bends will. It makes people loyal to him, makes them believe his lies, makes them willing to kill for him. How do we fight that? With truth, with sight, with the stone I gave you. She gripped his shoulders. If you use it fully, if you let it show you intent, guide your actions, you can counter his power. But it will cost you. The stone burns through whoever uses it that way. Drains life, vision, everything. My predecessor, the keeper who held your stone before me, he used it to stop a massacre. Saved 200 people, and went blind again within a week, died within a month. The room went silent except for their breathing. Your grandmother knew this might happen. Ressa said softly. Knew you might have to choose between your sight and your town. She believed you'd choose right. Amos looked down at the stone, still wrapped in cloth, pulsing with that faint warmth. He thought about Anna, about his grandmother, about the faces of Bellwick's people he'd only recently learned to see. If I use the stone and lose my sight again, you'll return to darkness. But you'll have saved your town, stopped Vix, protected the other stones. Ressa's voice carried both sorrow and certainty. That's the choice keepers face, Mayor. We see clearly, act decisively, and pay the cost without complaint. Marshal Stowe cleared his throat. We need to prepare. Whatever's coming, it's coming soon. Amos nodded, tucking the stone back into his pocket along with Ressa's documents. His mind was already shifting into planning mode. Defensive positions, warning the town, gathering anyone who could help fight. But underneath the practical thinking ran a deeper current of understanding. This was why his grandmother had prepared him, why Ressa had risked everything to deliver the stone, why he'd been given the gift of sight after 67 years of darkness, not to see the world, but to see clearly enough to protect it, not to enjoy vision, but to use it when it mattered most, and when the time came to choose between his own sight and his town's survival. There was really no choice at all. Let's prepare, he said to Stowe and Ressa. We've got work to do. Outside, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. Soon darkness would fall, the kind Amos used to know so well. But before it did, he'd use every moment of sight he had left to make sure Bellwick survived what was coming. His grandmother had seen this moment 60 years ago. Now Amos saw it too, and seeing, he knew exactly what he had to do. The old iron bell in the church tower hadn't rung in 30 years. The rope had rotted, the mechanism rusted, and somewhere along the way people had simply forgotten it existed. But Amos could see it now, could see it clearly through the tower window, and he knew exactly what it could do. Ring that bell, he told Tobias, and everyone in the valley will hear it. Everyone will know to gather, to prepare. Within the hour, Tobias had rigged new rope, tested the mechanism, and the bell's deep tone rolled across Bellwick like thunder. People emerged from homes and shops, faces turned upward, remembering what that sound meant. Their grandfathers had rung it during the drought. Their great-grandfathers had rung it when raiders came through 35 years back. It meant danger. It meant gather. It meant stand together. The town hall filled quickly. Amos stood at the front, Marshal Stowe at his side, Ressa watching from a chair near the wall. He saw fear in the faces before him, but also determination. These were people who'd built a town in hard country. They knew how to be strong when strength was needed. 8 armed men are riding toward Bellwick, Amos began, his voice steady. They're coming for the railroad deal, but more than that, they're coming to intimidate us into submission, to force us to accept terms that will destroy our community. He laid out what he knew about Vix, about the fraud, about the pattern of corruption that had destroyed other towns. He didn't mention the stones. Some truths were too strange, too dangerous to speak aloud. But he gave them enough to understand what they faced. We can run, he said, or we can stand. If we stand, some of us might get hurt. But if we run, we lose everything we've built here. Pauline stood from her seat. I say we stand. This is our home. Others echoed her sentiment. Amos saw it spread through the crowd, not blind courage, but clear-eyed determination. They understood the risk and chose to face it anyway. Marshal Stowe stepped forward. I have federal authority here, but I'm one man. If we're going to defend this town, we need organization, strategy, and everyone doing their part. They spent the next hour planning. Tobias organized the men who could shoot, hunters mostly, familiar with rifles but not combat. Marshal Stowe positioned them at key points around town, taking advantage of Bellwick's geography. The valley entrance was narrow, flanked by ridges that could provide cover and height advantage. Pauline gathered the women to prepare the church as a safe house. Children and elderly would shelter there. Protected by thick stone walls, Dr. Latimer set up a medical station with what supplies he had, his hands shaking but his voice steady. Owen the surveyor proved invaluable, sketching quick maps of the best defensive positions, explaining how Vix's men would likely approach. They'll expect easy intimidation, he said. Won't be prepared for organized resistance. As preparations continued, Amos walked through town with new purpose. His vision, still strange, still overwhelming at times, showed him details he needed to see. Sightlines, cover positions, places where defenders could fire from relative safety. He positioned people carefully, using both his old knowledge of the town's geography by sound and touch, and his new ability to see the physical space. At the ridge overlooking the valley entrance, he stood with Tobias. The deputy had positioned himself with his father's long rifle, passed down through 3 generations. It was a good weapon, well maintained, accurate. You sure about this? Tobias asked quietly. No, but I'm sure about letting Vix walk into Bellwick unchallenged being worse. Tobias checked his ammunition, his movements practiced. Whatever happens today, Amos, I'm glad I served as your deputy. Been an honor. The honor's been mine. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Amos returned to his office. Ressa waited there, the wrapped sight stone on the desk between them. You're really going to do this, she said. I am. You understand what it means? Using the stone that way will let you see intent before action. You'll know who's about to shoot before they pull the trigger. See where danger comes from before it arrives. You'll be able to coordinate the defense like a conductor leading an orchestra. And afterward, the stone will drain you. Whether it takes your sight immediately or over days, I don't know. Could take more than that. Could take... She paused. Everything. Amos picked up the stone, felt its warmth pulse against his palm. He thought about the faces he'd seen these past weeks. Anna's portrait, Pauline's determined expression, the children playing in the street, unaware of the danger approaching, the sunrise he'd watched from his window yesterday morning, all of it temporary, all of it borrowed time. My grandmother saw this moment, he said. She knew I'd have to choose. She believed you'd choose right. Then I hope she was right about me. He unwrapped the stone, held it up to the fading light. It pulsed brighter, responding to his intention. How do I use it? Hold it against your chest, over your heart. Let it sync with your heartbeat. When the moment comes, when you need to see clearly, really see, just focus your intention, and it'll show you what you need. She stood, moved to the door, then turned back. Your grandmother loved you, Mayor, even though she died when you were young. She loved you enough to sacrifice something precious to protect you and your town 60 years later. That's a powerful thing. After she left, Amos sat alone in the quiet office. He placed the stone against his chest, felt it warm against his skin, felt something like a second heartbeat syncing with his own. The world sharpened around him. Colors brightened, edges became clearer, and he began to sense something beyond normal vision. Possibilities, futures, the shape of what might come. It was intoxicating and terrifying all at once. Outside, the sun touched the western mountains. Amos stood, took up his walking staff, more weapon than aid now, and stepped into the street. The town looked different. Not just visible, but alive with potential, every moment branching into countless futures. He made his way to the church where families had gathered. Children clung to their mothers. Old folks sat on pews, hands clasped in prayer. Amos saw their fear, their trust, the weight of hope they'd placed on him. Pauline met him at the door. Everything's ready here. Whatever happens, we're prepared. If things go wrong, they won't. You'll figure it out. You always do. She touched his arm gently. Amos, I need to say something I should have said years ago. Anna would be proud of you, of who you've become, sight or no sight. Thank you, Pauline. Come back safe. He walked to the town hall, climbed to the second floor where Marshal Stowe had set up a command position. From here they could see the valley entrance, the approaches, the defensive positions spread throughout Bellwick. Stowe handed him a rifle. You know how to use this? Pointed it away from myself a few times. Never at a person. Hopefully you won't have to today either. The Marshal checked his revolver. But if it comes to it, aim for center mass. Don't hesitate. I've never killed anyone, Marshal. Neither had I before my first gunfight. Sometimes good men have to do hard things to protect what matters. As twilight settled, a rider appeared on the ridge. A scout, probably. He surveyed the town, noticed the preparations, turned his horse, and disappeared back the way he'd come. They know we're ready, Tobias called up from his position. Good, Amos replied. Let them know we won't surrender easy. The stone against his chest pulsed steadily. Amos focused on it, let it expand his awareness. He began to sense movement in the distance. Riders approaching, 8 of them, as Stowe had predicted, spreading out as they entered the valley. And at their center, Harrison Vicks, carrying his own stone, its corrupted power radiating like heat shimmer on a summer road. Here they come, Amos said quietly. Marshal Stowe stood beside him, rifle ready. Whatever happens, Mayor, you've done right by this town. Remember that, Amos nodded, his eyes scanning the darkening valley. The stone showed him glimpses, possible futures branching out like tree limbs. In some, Bellwick burned. In others, the defenders held. In a few, everyone survived. And in many, Amos saw himself standing blind once more. The price of victory paid in full. But one future shone brighter than the rest, a path through the chaos where truth defeated corruption, where community overcame violence, where an old blind mayor who'd been given temporary sight used it to save everything he'd spent his life protecting. That was the future he'd fight for. Ready? Stowe asked. Ready, Amos replied. The riders emerged from the narrow valley entrance, 8 men with weapons drawn, Vicks at their center. They moved with the confidence of men who'd done this before, who expected fear and capitulation. Instead, they found a town that had rung its bell, gathered its strength, and prepared to stand its ground. Amos pressed the stone harder against his chest, felt its power surge through him, felt his vision sharpen impossibly. He could see everything now, every face, every weapon, every possibility. The final confrontation was about to begin, and one way or another, by the time it ended, Bellwick would know whether an old mayor's sacrifice had been enough. The riders stopped at the edge of Main Street, their horses pawing the dirt. Amos watched from the second-floor window as Harrison Vicks dismounted, his movements calculated, deliberate. The other 7 men spread out behind him, hands near their weapons, eyes scanning the too quiet town. Vicks called out, his voice carrying false friendliness. Mayor Kett, I think we need to have another conversation about that railroad deal. Amos stepped into view at the window, letting Vicks see him clearly. I think we've said all we need to say, Mr. Vicks, or should I call you Mr. Blackwell? The false friendliness dropped like a mask. So Ressa told you? I wondered if she would. She told me enough. About the fraud, the murders, the stones you're hunting. Amos kept his voice steady. You're not getting what you came for. Vicks laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think you can stop me? An old man who's been able to see for barely 2 weeks. He pulled something from his coat, a dark stone, cracked and pulsing with sickly light. I've had mine for 10 years. I've learned what it can do. The corrupted stone's influence rolled outward like a wave. Amos felt it immediately, a pressure against his mind. Whispers suggesting he should surrender, that resistance was foolish, that Vicks was right and reasonable and should be obeyed. Marshal Stowe swayed beside him, his hand loosening on his rifle. Amos pressed his own stone harder against his chest, felt its clean power push back against Vicks's corruption. The whispers faded. His vision sharpened further, showing him not just what was, but what would be, branching futures spreading out from this moment. Marshal, he said quietly, stay focused. His stone is trying to influence you. Stowe shook his head as if clearing water from his ears. I feel it, like voices telling me to stand down. Don't listen. Vicks's expression darkened. I'd hoped to do this cleanly, Mayor. Take what I need. Leave quietly. But if you insist on being difficult, he gestured to his men, you know what to do. The 7 hired guns began to spread out, moving with practiced precision. Amos watched through his enhanced vision, seeing their intentions before they acted. The young one on the left, nervous, finger twitching toward his holster. The older man to the right, calm, professional, would shoot without hesitation. The others arrayed between, varying degrees of dangerous. Tobias, Amos called down to the church tower where his deputy was positioned. Left flank, nervous young man in the brown jacket. He's about to draw first. I see him. The enhanced sight showed Amos the future splitting. In one branch, the young gunman drew and fired, hitting an innocent bystander. In another, Tobias's shot came first, stopping the threat without lethal force. Aim for his gun hand. Right side. Fire on my mark. Vix's men tensed, sensing something wrong in how prepared the town seemed. Now, Amos said calmly. Tobias's rifle cracked. The young gunman's weapon flew from his hand before he'd even cleared leather. His finger shattered. He screamed, staggered backward, chaos erupted. Vix's men scattered for cover, drawing weapons. Return fire came from defensive positions throughout town. Not wild shooting, but coordinated. Controlled by Amos's directions as he called out positions and threats. Vincent, 2 behind the water trough, east side. Pauline's people, 3 moving toward the general store. Marshal, the one in black heading for the alley, he's got a rifle. The sight stone showed him everything. Trajectories, intentions, the microseconds before action became violence. He directed Bellwick's defense like conducting a symphony, each defender playing their part in perfect coordination. But it was draining him. Amos felt the stone's power burning through him, felt his vision begin to blur at the edges. Blood trickled from his nose, warm against his lips. 3 of Vix's men were disarmed or wounded, scattered and confused by resistance they hadn't expected. But 4 remained, including Vix himself, and they were adapting, getting smarter about their positioning. Marshal Stowe engaged one in close combat, his federal training evident in practiced movements. But another had flanked around, was taking aim at the Marshal's exposed back. Amos saw it happening, saw the finger tightening on the trigger. "Stowe, down!" The Marshal dropped. The shot went wide. Ressa appeared on a rooftop. When had she gotten there? Her own rifle speaking once. The flanking gunman fell, weapon clattering from his hand, but Vix was moving now, advancing up Main Street toward the town hall. Toward Amos. His corrupted stone blazed with dark light, and Amos felt its influence growing stronger. Some of the townspeople hesitated, weapons lowering despite themselves. "Don't listen to him," Amos shouted. "Focus on protecting your homes, your families." Vix stopped in the middle of the street, looked up at Amos with cold calculation. "You're using the sight stone." "I can feel it. But you don't know what you're doing, burning yourself up to save these people who'll forget you the moment you're gone." "Maybe," Amos replied, wiping blood from his face. "But they'll still be here to forget me. That's what matters." Vix pulled his revolver, aimed it directly at Amos. "Then let's see whose stone is stronger, old man. Mine's been feeding on ambition and power for a decade. Yours is fresh, untested, wielded by someone who doesn't understand what he's holding." The corrupted stone pulsed, and Amos felt reality itself twist around them. The 2 stones connected across the distance between them, clean power meeting corruption, truth confronting deception. Amos felt the collision like physical impact, felt Vix trying to force his will through the dark stone's influence. But something unexpected happened. The sight stone showed Amos not just the present moment, but deeper truth. He saw into Harrison Vix, saw past the cold calculation to the frightened man beneath. Saw the young land clerk who'd once believed in progress, who'd made his first compromise, thinking it was necessary, who'd kept making compromises until he couldn't remember what he'd originally believed in. Saw the moment Vix had found the corrupted stone, had felt its power, had let it consume whatever conscience remained. Saw the terrible truth. Vix was addicted to the stone's power, was dying from it, would be dead within a year, whether he won this confrontation or not. The dark stone was devouring him from inside. "You're already dead, Harrison," Amos said quietly, but his words carried across the suddenly silent street. "The stone you're holding, it's killing you. Has been for years. You can feel it, can't you? The way it burns inside, the way you can't put it down anymore, even if you wanted to." Vix's hand trembled, his aim wavering. "You don't know anything. I see everything." That's what this stone does. It shows truth. And the truth is, you stopped being Harrison Blackwell years ago. You're just an echo now, a hollow thing kept moving by that corrupted power. The sightstone flared brighter, and Amos felt it pour through him. not just showing him futures, but showing everyone present the same truth he saw. The townspeople, Vix's remaining men, even the wounded, all of them suddenly saw clearly what Harrison Vix had become. A few of the hired guns lowered their weapons, horror crossing their faces. "We didn't sign up for this," one muttered, backing away. "This isn't about railroad money. This is something else." Vix spun toward them, his corrupted stone pulsing. "You'll do what I pay you to do." But his power over them was breaking. The sight stone's influence was stronger, showing truth they couldn't ignore. Two more of his men dropped their weapons, raised their hands in surrender. Only one remained loyal, or perhaps too afraid to disobey. He raised his rifle toward Amos, finger on the trigger. The sight stone showed Amos the shot's trajectory, the precise moment of firing. Showed him two futures, one where he dodged and lived, one where he stood still and took the bullet, giving Tobias the clear shot he needed to end this. Amos made his choice. Stood still, trusted. Tobias, Ressa, now! Two rifles fired simultaneously. The loyal gunman's weapon exploded from the combined shots before he could fire. Vix stood alone in the street, abandoned, exposed. "This is over." "Harrison!" Marshal Stowe called, moving into the open with his revolver trained on Vix. "Drop the stone." "Surrender." Vix looked around, at his scattered men, at the armed townspeople, at the impossible resistance. His corrupted stone pulsed faster, more erratically. "No, I've come too far. Sacrificed too much." He turned back to Amos. "I'll kill you and take that stone. Then I'll find the others. I'll have the power I've earned." "You've earned nothing but suffering," Amos interrupted. His vision was fading now, the edges of the world blurring. He could feel the sightstone draining him, taking what it needed to finish this. "But I'll show you mercy anyway." He pressed the stone fully against his heart, released its complete power. Light blazed from it, pure, clean, overwhelming. Vix's corrupted stone shattered in his hand, fragments falling like dark snow. The influence that had held him together for years broke with it. Vix collapsed, suddenly looking ancient, all the stolen vitality draining away. Marshal Stowe rushed forward, kicked the stone fragments away from Vix's reach. "It's done. You're under arrest for—" He stopped. Vix wasn't moving. Dr. Latimer ran over, knelt beside the fallen man. After a moment he looked up and shook his head. Heart gave out. Probably been damaged for years by whatever that stone was doing to him. Amos felt his own heart laboring, felt the sight stone cool against his chest. His vision darkened, not the gradual sunset of evening, but the return of the blindness he'd known his whole life. The last thing he saw clearly was the sun touching the western mountains, painting the sky in colors he was grateful to have witnessed. He saw his town standing safe, saw people emerging from cover, saw the faces of those he'd protected. Then darkness returned. But it felt different this time, not empty, but full of memory, full of images he'd carry forever, even in blindness. Anna's portrait, Pauline's determined expression, the sunrise over Bellwick, the faces of his people. Amos smiled as his legs gave out. Tobias caught him before he fell. "I saw enough," Amos whispered. More than enough. The sight stone slipped from his hand, now dull and grey. Its purpose fulfilled, its power spent, its cost paid in full. 3 weeks passed before Amos felt strong enough to leave his bed for more than a few hours. Dr. Latimer visited daily, checking his vitals, expressing medical confusion about symptoms that made no sense, exhaustion without cause, weakness that couldn't be explained by any physical ailment. "You're recovering from something I don't have words for," Vincent finally admitted. "But you're recovering. That's what matters." The blindness was complete now, absolute as it had been before. But Amos found he didn't mourn it the way he thought he might. The 2 weeks of sight had given him something permanent, memories in color and shape that would never fade. He carried those images with him into the darkness, and they lit it in ways that surprised him. On the day he finally returned to his office, half the town came out to greet him. He heard their voices, knew them all, but now he also remembered their faces. Could picture Pauline's smile as she guided him up the steps. Could imagine Tobias's concerned expression as he settled Amos into his familiar chair. "The town council met while you were recovering," Tobias said. "Made some decisions. Good ones, I hope. You've been officially elected for another term. Unanimous vote, with one condition, that I train as your successor. Take over the day-to-day operations. Prepare to step into the role when you're ready to pass it on." Amos smiled. "That's a good condition. You'll make a better mayor than I ever was. Doubt that's possible." Marshal Stowe arrived that afternoon with news. He'd brought Ressa with him, her legal status finally resolved. "All charges dropped," Stowe announced. "Federal review found evidence of the frame-up, discovered documents Vix had hidden that proved Miss Vale's innocence. She's been offered her old position back with an apology from the territorial government. Are you going to take it?" Amos asked. Ressa's voice came from near the window. "No, I'm done with government work. But I accepted a different role, as a consultant on land fraud cases, helping expose corruption before it destroys more towns." "And the other stones?" "Safe. The keepers have moved them to new locations. Vix's network is being dismantled, his associates arrested. It'll take time, but the pattern he established is breaking apart." Stowe cleared his throat. "There's something else. The Central Pacific reviewed the Bellwick proposal after Vix's crimes came to light. They've withdrawn their route plan. Turns out the whole thing was built on his fraudulent land acquisitions. The railroad's going through a different valley entirely now." Amos absorbed this, feeling tension he'd carried for months finally release. "So Bellwick stays as it is, for now. Progress will come eventually, but on the town's terms, when you're ready for it." After they left, Amos sat alone in the quiet office. His hands found the walking staff, traced the notches carved into its surface. 43 marks of history. He ran his fingers over them, remembering each one. Then he found his carving knife in the desk drawer. Slowly, carefully, he carved a new notch, deeper than the others, distinct. The mark for the day Bellwick stood together. The day sight returned briefly and departed again. The day a corrupt man fell and a town survived. Pauline's footsteps approached. He knew them well. She entered, closed the door softly. "How are you feeling?" "Tired, grateful, ready to get back to work. The town's doing well. People have been helping each other, coming together in ways I haven't seen before. What happened? It changed something in all of us. Fear has a way of doing that. So does surviving fear together." She moved closer and he heard the rustle of paper. "I brought you something. A letter from Anna's sister. She heard about what happened, wanted to send her thoughts." Amos took the letter, held it in his hands. Tobias would read it to him later, as he did all correspondence now. But for a moment he just held it, thinking about Anna, about the grandmother who'd loved him enough to see 60 years into the future, about the gift of sight that had cost him everything and given him more than he could measure. "Pauline, can I ask you something?" "Always. In the 2 weeks I could see, I watched how you moved through the world. You're graceful, confident. But there was something else, a kindness in your eyes, when you looked at people, especially children. I never heard that kindness before, but I saw it. And now I'll always know it's there. That's a lovely thing to say. It's the truth. The sight stone gave me that, the ability to see truth even after the vision faded." He paused. "I think maybe that's the real gift. Not the seeing itself, but learning what to look for, what matters, what lasts." Evening found Amos on his porch, listening to Bellwick settle into its familiar rhythms. Children called to each other in the street. The smith's hammer had gone quiet. Someone was playing a fiddle in the distance. A tune he remembered from his childhood. Tobias joined him, carrying a new deed ledger they'd prepared. Every entry verified, every signature authentic, every property claim true and legal. "It's all in order now," Tobias said. "Clean record, honest accounting. Good, that's how it should stay. Amos, do you ever regret it? Losing your sight again to stop Vix?" Amos thought about the question, about the images he carried in darkness. Anna's face, the sunrise, the town standing safe. Not for a moment. "Some prices are worth paying. Your grandmother must have been quite a woman to see all this coming." "She was, and she taught me something without ever speaking to me directly. that leadership isn't about seeing everything. It's about seeing what matters and acting on it even when it costs you. Later, alone in his house, Amos opened the drawer and lifted Anna's locket. He couldn't see the portrait anymore, but he remembered it perfectly. Would always remember it. Would carry that image of her young and smiling into whatever years remained to him. "I saw you," he whispered to the memory. "Finally saw you the way you deserve to be seen. I hope that's enough." He returned the locket to its place, closed the drawer. Outside, Bellwick moved through its evening. Safe and whole, protected by an old blind mare who'd learned that sight was temporary, but vision could last forever. The darkness around him felt comfortable now, familiar as an old friend, and in that darkness he could see clearly what mattered most: community, sacrifice, the quiet courage of ordinary people choosing to stand together. Some gifts were meant to be temporary. Some costs were meant to be paid, and some old soldiers never truly retired. They just changed the battlefield they defended. Amos Kett, blind mayor of Bellwick, who'd seen light for 2 weeks and darkness for 67 years, settled into his chair and smiled. He'd seen enough. More than enough. And what he'd seen had saved everything worth saving. That was all any man could ask for.